It
looks like we're live. Yay. Hi, everyone. My name is Lori Beth Goldman, and this is episode number 54, yep, of Exploring Genuine Transformation. For those of you who don't know me, I am a psychotherapist and a psychospiritual mentor for women, and I work primarily with women who have been in the personal growth and sort of spiritual personal development space for a long time, and they still feel stuck in spite of doing a lot of work on themselves. So what I love doing is I love working with women to get them unstuck, to, work through lifelong trauma, and to provide them with the spiritual and somatic and therapeutic tools to start enjoying and living their lives now so that they don't have to keep endlessly working on themselves. And this show is a show that I created to talk with different therapists, coaches, thought leaders, all in the realm of transformation. And what I am interested in here is transformation for the sake of an inner journey rather than of getting what you want in life. So I have interviewed people on all different topics. And today I'm going to be interviewing Christina Morassi. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm really excited about today's show. I'll introduce Christina first, and then we can talk about what the show is going to be about. So Christina is I like how you call yourself. I'm actually going to look at my notes that I just remember that I really liked it. Successful healer turned coach, who is actually a business. I would say you're a business coach now, right? Primarily, although what I love about what you're doing and what we're going to be talking about today is you're a business coach, but you're bringing in like a very holistic way of doing business, we could say. And also I think working on all the different levels, right? So working on the emotional level, the psychological level, like from a trauma focus, we're going to be talking about the feminine today. And so really like business, we're not really only talking, it's a way of doing business coaching that really encompasses it all. It seems like to me.
Yeah, I mean, I love the way you put that. I feel like I'm a midwife, really, that I'm helping women midwife their purpose and what I might call their body of work into the world. And then the form that takes is a business, right? So there's so much that happens when we're really finally ready to step into the thing that we came here to do on the planet. And so that's a, very transformational, shamanic, inner, journey of the soul that one needs to go through. And then you need to have the structures of how to form that to put it out into the world. So we can call myself feminine business coach. I love it, and it is so much broader than that too. So you put it beautifully. Thank you.
Yeah, and I mean already that gets into our topic, and it's such a beautiful way of saying it, right? Because it's like that business is coming from the inside out, that like your purpose is coming from the depths of you. It's coming from, and doing business in a way that's coming from more of your kind of internal operating system. And I know you call your work the feminine operating system, but that just came through me, the internal, right? It's kind of coming from the inside, from who you truly are. And then being able to actually have, I mean, this is what I love about your work from what I've seen is that, and then to be able to take that and create the structures, but you're not creating the structures first. You're not like doing it from this vantage point of like, oh, I want this in my business, so now I have to sort of adjust myself to fit this other mold. Rather, it's like, what is truly juicy and inspiring and alive for me, right? And then how can we bring that out into the world in a way that works? But also my senses, and you'll say more about it, that way that works is unique for each person. And it's not, and there's a million ways to do business. That's the truth of it. There's not one way. So, So I think that's a good intro. I will say that, Christina has been doing this for a long time. And I know that you have always for many years have been bringing a trauma focused lens, which I think is really important to this work. So I want to add that. And really, looking at this kind of more of this way, this masculine male way of doing business. That's sort of what the norm has been. And then what is the feminine way? And obviously within that, what's the like unique way for each woman? And then, you've just been also working a lot with the dark feminine, which obviously I have a personal passion for as well. Right. And so hopefully we'll get into that today too. And yeah, so we can define what that is, but Christina has done a couple of, I think this is your second round, right? That you just launched of a group dark feminine program that just looks so on fire. So yeah, so I think that's a good, that's a good enough, I think that's a good intro in the sense that what we're actually going to be diving in today, what our topic is, and it's really, we'll start with Christina's story, and that's also the topic of the interview, which is why I destroyed my high six-figure coaching business. And so let's dive into that. And then within that, we're going to basically, look at Christina's body of work more closely. But I think the story will really kind of get us into the area that we're wanting to look at, and also show kind of in a firsthand way, like what this old way is versus this way that you're creating to support women. Mm-hmm.
I love it. It's like, let's just start right in the dark feminine about how I destroyed the damn business. This is how I think you and I really connected was, I'm like, who's this other woman talking about the dark feminine out there? Like, I sort of felt alone out there hanging in the wind, for a long time, and then started to see some other amazing women. So I love, your take around the dark feminine too. And I think we need more of us being well versed in her and falling in love with her. And so this is great. Let's start right there.
Yeah.
All right. So smidge of backstory. So I started in the healing arts 20 years ago. And so for 10 years, I was a full-on hippie healer living in Los Angeles as a house sitter. Didn't even really have a successful business, because I wasn't really trying. Like my spiritual path was so important to me. And then at some point I wanted to reach more people. And so as you do, you find the coaching industry, and it was like, something about this feels right. So I dove headfirst in, ended up, hiring the coaches and investing a lot and getting a lot of help. And it did help me really burst onto the scene and create a lot of success really fast. And so I all of a sudden kind of became this successful, business coach in a way, like going through the channels and definitely paying my dues. But over the course of 3 years, reached a high six figures, and it was like, wait a minute, I'm like a hippie house sitter. How the hell did this happen? And there was something amazing about it because I was helping women, find their ecstatic brand, as I called it. And so that's really like where you're weaving together every life experience, every work experience into the unique expression of you, what you came to do here on the planet, right? Like your purpose, your body of work, like we talked about earlier. And so there were lots of pieces about, that success that I enjoyed, I loved feeling like clicked into my purpose. I loved reaching women from around the world. And I kind of created the machine of a successful coaching business, and doing the big 3-day live events and having the high-end masterminds and doing the big online launches. And it did feel fulfilling, especially because, I'm doing all this because I want to be able to be a thought leader out there in the world and be able to give back. And, my crowning achievement is that myself and my community raised $25,000 to sponsor a village in Africa for 5 years, to build a school and have, clean water and school supplies and medical supplies and all of these things. And that was like, I wouldn't have gotten to do that if I'd stayed as a hippie house sitter, and so that's some impact out there in the world. And so that all felt wonderful. But there was a moment where I was like, okay, I'm so deeply interested in transformation, and I've been doing this a long time, and I'm on stage talking about taglines, helping people like build their businesses. And there's aspects of building business that I love. But, the nitty gritty aspects of it, it just felt like, this isn't quite my genius. And so I was like, okay, what do I do? I've got this machine of a successful coaching business now. So I thought, okay, let me be reasonable and let me just start to try and turn the ship slowly. So I tried some different programs and different things and, to make it feel more fulfilling to myself, but it wasn't working, and there was a moment where I was like, okay, Christina, you've been trying this long enough. It's not really shifting. So you're going to have to do something more drastic. And so there was this weekend where I had to make some decisions about like next live events and, big investments. And I was in a launch and like all of these things, like this convergence. And I thought, it's not working. And if I want something different to happen, I'm going to have to do something different. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna pull the whole damn plug and just like dive into the unknown for what I thought would be a couple of months. It's now been like 6.5 years of being profoundly dismantled, and there has been growth in that process, which you'll hear about. And at the same time, there was just a moment of like, this isn't working, so I've got to do something drastic. So I pulled the plug, canceled a launch, didn't do the live event, sort of, went into like the unknown and thought, okay, let me listen for what's next. And so in that process, I moved from Los Angeles up to the Bay Area, and I was really determined. I was working nonstop. And so I was like, I need a personal life. Like, this is just ridiculous, And so I kind of carved out time for a personal life, started really exploring more around my sensuality, which had always been part of my work woven in, but I dove in a little bit more in the Bay Area. If any of you are familiar, like, that's what you do there. You explore your sensuality. It oozes out of the soil up there in such a fascinating way. So I did lots of pleasure research and exploration, if you will. And in that process, I started to find and see how much power was in a woman and in her sex. And so it was like, wait a minute. I've got all my successful friends with their 7-figure businesses who are still doing really well, but they're exhausted. I'm on the verge of burnout and adrenal fatigue. Like, it's not sustainable the way we've been taught to do business, because it's built on masculine values, and we are women and we have different values and a different operating system and a different design. And so I was like, wait, there's so much power to women's sex, but like, why aren't we using that power in business? And obviously in an appropriate fashion. There's a oomph and a power to it. And even if any of you have read the seminal book like Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, there's a whole chapter 11, on sex transmutation. And this book was written in 1937 about like success. And I'm like, wait, if he could talk about sex power back in 1937, why the hell can't we talk about it now? And why does nobody understand what chapter 11 is even about? And I thought, still don't even totally get it, but I'm like, I'm going to figure it out. And so the whole idea was that successful men had a high sex drive, and they were using that towards their business success. So that's really where I got excited about, okay, I got to let go of just being a business coach. There's a different way that we need to operate as women, and I want to figure out what that is. And so I did finally start in that direction back in 2015, but it's been a wild ride of figuring out what that body of work is and how to unplug from the old way so that I can plug into the new way from within, creating business from within and from my own natural design. Because it's no joke. I mean, there's a lot more to say about that, but that's sort of the story of why I pulled the plug. Was I knew there was more. I was on the verge of burnout, not quite there, but close. And I knew that there was a different way to operate that no one was teaching me. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to figure it out for myself. And then that's now what I get to share with women.
Beautiful. Well, I'm wondering if you might, just because you've shared a little bit with me off this call or, before, if you might kind of go into a little bit about, it sounds like, what I'm curious about is, it sounds like it was a conscious process, but then the process kind of took hold on its own. Like, it sort of, as the dark feminine does, right? Like, it was a process of like, this isn't really working, but so I want something else. I know that there's a different way, but then there was like, I'm sure some places where then it started to take hold of you. So if you maybe could share a little bit about some decision points that you made, and like a little bit more about the juicy story. I'm curious.
Yes. Someday I will share the full story because it's been a wild and intense ride, like one I honestly wouldn't wish on anyone. That's partially why I'm like, listen, so because it's, interesting. I pulled the plug in 2014 and I've since seen many of my colleagues do the same. And so it's in the air where people are realizing the old ways aren't working. And of course, now, with 2020, like we all realize the old ways aren't working. And so I'm like, listen, if I can share with you what I've learned and shorten your learning curve in any way possible, please let me do it, because otherwise it's super intense. Let me share with you what I've learned about the dark feminine. So let's see. Interesting, juicy stories from that time. Well, it was interesting because, I had created a lot of success, and there's some egoic stuff that goes along with that. Of course, it's only natural. And so I was well known, and even, small version of this, but a little bit celebrity-esque in my world, right? I mean, small version, very small, but in LA. So then I moved up to San Francisco now, and into Oakland, and it was like all of a sudden no one has a freaking clue who I am. Like nobody knows like what I've created or the chops. And then I'm dismantled because I pulled the plug, and a little like, who am I, right? So I'm not in my power really either. And so it was just so humbling, which is great. I don't mind that part of the journey, but it was also super intense. So, I've always seen business as like my personal development, path in a way. And so in that process of pulling the plug and going into the unknown and listening, it really was doing a lot of deep excavation too, to see like, well, why did I even try and do it the old way? Why aren't I listening to my own inner power? Where is my inner wisdom? How do I even hear that? How do I heal? I'd already worked on my process, healing my own trauma for, well, 15 years at that point, now 20. But there's always more. There's always more, right? So it was just these interesting journeys of, I pulled the plug, but I'd grown used to a certain lifestyle, and I didn't know how long the dismantling would take. So, the finances got a little interesting, because if I had sort of downsized fast, that would have helped, but I didn't know that I needed to, because I thought it would be a couple of months. And so, when I finally got the new direction, it was a year into it. So it took a whole year of like, I don't know what I'm doing, and just sitting in the unknown. And that's a great, lesson from the dark feminine, is how do we sit in the unknown of the great mystery, and not need to have it all figured out, and not need to get into action, and not need to fix it, and to just sit and listen and wait. And then I got my answers, but it took a lot longer than I wanted. So, that was a process. And then even when I started in the new direction, it was like I could feel myself slipping back into the old ways. It's
Yeah.
very hard, because this stuff, I talk about how we've all had a patriarchal operating system like automatically installed into our hard drive. We didn't have a say in the matter. It was like, automatic. And we're all operating out of that, all out of that. And it's been hardwired into our neurons. So to try and switch out of the patriarchal operating system is no joke. It takes consistency and really rewiring, I believe, from the left brain into the right. And so ideally that they learn how to work together, of course. So there was just a lot of like half-assing it for a while too, of like, I'm doing it a new way, but I kind of not, because I know the old way, and it's really hard to figure out the new way. And then I felt crazy the entire time as well. So there were the constant thoughts of like, I'm being irresponsible. This is dumb. Like maybe I'm, navel gazing way too much. Like the inner voices were so intense, and nobody around me was doing the same things. My colleagues all thought I was nuts. And so there was a lot of bumping up against that. And even, my parents are worried about me. Like, all these things sort of showed up. And so I had to fight for, wait, what do I know to be true, even if it looks so different from what's out there? So those are just some of the pieces of the story of like what I had to fight against.
And so like just I mean we'll go into your body of work now, but just to like even if you think about that time, let's say where you were sitting there, I say it so nonchalantly,
Hang it
while you
out.
while you were being with yourself for that year. I mean, was the process that you were kind of you had decided that there was a different way to do it, but you didn't know what that was. And so you were more in this kind of like listening process of allowing yourself to be in that kind of what I would call, I mean, I do call that the dark feminine. I would also call that like the it's more of like the womb space to me. It's like this kind of dark under, it's like the thing hasn't been birthed yet. It's like still in, right? It's maybe being conceived. It's being, it's implanting. It's maybe being, you're pregnant with it or
Yep.
something. It could be
Gestating, ripening.
yeah. But so it sounds like in that process, you were kind of committed to being with that. And then when you started, so you were getting kind of outside judgment at that point about, or concern about, what are you doing? Why aren't you doing this? But that
Mhm.
also, I'm guessing, like, do you have any, like, can you share within that, when you did finally, when things did start to come through, what some of the things that you were then doing, even in those early days, and then kind of getting, like trying things that came through that you then tried, but then you said you would get kind of, you'd fall back into sort of the old ways, and that you were kind of in this battle. I'm just curious.
Yeah, those are great questions. No one's ever actually asked me about these pieces of the puzzle. So I would say when I pulled the plug, I was waiting for like a true impulse, if you will, like listening from the inside out and a deep knowing of like, oh yeah, that's the thing. Instead of this is the smart thing that I should do, and this is what would make sense in business, and I know how to do this, and I know how to help people do this in their own businesses. But like, like a strategy mind instead of like an impulse, intuition, like creative pulse from within, a desire, like an inner wisdom. And so if I felt, I guess it was be an alignment piece, like if something felt in alignment, then I would take action. And if there was nothing there, then I didn't do it. And so there were moments where, I kind of, instead of doing big live events and big launches and whatever, I sort of was listening, okay, well, what's something I can do in the meantime, like that feels in alignment. Like, I guess that was the ruler. Does this feel in alignment? And so I wasn't willing to do what I thought I should do. It was more like I was only willing to do what felt in alignment. And there would usually be a knowing of like, yes, let me try that. Now, the interesting thing was some of the things that felt in alignment from within did not net me results, if you will. Like, I would try some things and be like, but wait, I was listening. I didn't think I was pushing. But they didn't quite bring in the money, that I was needing at the time. And so it's just been a fascinating journey. And, you really learn that we're all on a different path. And I can see, like, I look back now and I can see that the divine was stripping me down and stripping me down and stripping me down some more until I stopped gripping.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know that at the time, and no one could help me because no one else was on the journey that I knew. And so I wish someone had said to me, let it all go. Just surrender and go even more kamikaze than you have. Like, I wish someone had given me permission to do that because I think I needed to actually go even deeper. And I didn't know that. And so does that answer some of the questions?
Yeah, that's beautiful. And also just like what I'm thinking is I mean, the last part of what you said just really, I mean, one, I think like you were pointing here when you said an alignment. So I'm guessing for you, there's something right here. I'm always really curious even about like the words we use, right? Even the word alignment, because I think again, and I think this is part of your work now, that you're supporting women to find what's true for them, right? Like not your way. And like
Yes.
what's in alignment for what, like some of us we get information all in different kinds of ways.
Mhm.
So that I was that I was just feeling into. And that for you, you were following, you like, I think that's a quality that all of us in this culture have actually been trained out of, is trusting ourselves, trusting what's actually in alignment meaning like this is where I'm being guided to move forward. And then I love what you said about it because right, like even the idea that, oh well, because it's in alignment this should then yield this result, like exactly how you said it, is another way of sort of trying to control it. Like, well, because I'm in truth and in alignment. Whereas what you're now looking back on is you're like, oh, I had this journey, and actually this journey was, I didn't know it at the time, but it was I can't think of the word that you used, but it was sort of like, oh, you said like grinding you, Like it was kind of taking everything from you. It's like, oh, you think that like this is a good way to, you know, that you're in alignment this way and that's going to yield the result. Like, what's it like when that doesn't work either?
Right.
I mean, that's what it sounds like.
No,
So
well said. And I want to honor, because even in the way you introed your work, you talked about that like you don't do the transformation in order to get the thing, right? And I
yeah.
feel like, to be honest, I'm still getting that piece,
Oh,
like, because there's still like, I'm doing all the right things to like be in my feminine, but I'm still a little hooked into that because I think it'll get me the thing. And so
yeah.
I'm watching myself like tease that piece apart. So I want to honor you that, like, I feel like you've claimed that even more, and my system is still sort of landing there. So and this is what I've said. I'm like, listen, no one woman has this figured out of like how we get into our natural design. It's impossible. No one woman has this figured out, but we need to open source this as a sisterhood. And I'm like, listen, I don't have it figured out either, but I'll keep creating spaces where we can figure it out together. So this is a moment where I'm getting gifted, like in this piece that you hold. I'm like, right, I got to get that even a little deeper. I can
Mhm.
feel that.
I will also say I can get it deeper. I know it very well because I'm also kind of, you know, in that way in my own life, there's been so much kind of fighting. I used to say like, I'm like the queen of resistance, you know, it's like, I'm like, and so, yeah, I think partly that's why I also do this show. That's why I'm interested in this is because, and I love this. A friend of mine says this, another coach, she always says like, it's like what you're teaching and what you're offering is always your unique medicine, right? Like the medicine that's continually schooling you. And so we're
My
both,
favorite quote is, "We teach what we have to learn."
yeah.
And so that keeps me humble. So when I hear myself pontificating and like thinking I know everything, I'm like, I know I need to be listening to this for myself. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a good humility moment.
Yeah. And what I would say, and I think this is another point of connection that we have, I'll just say, because it just came through too, is that what I feel most inspired by is helping women find their own way. And
Mhm.
so that's why I think that is something I really focus on. It's like, I don't know the way, but I'm here again. You said it so well. I want to create spaces where women get to learn that for themselves, and I'm, you know, both reflecting and also there and also able to go deeper, you know, help them go deeper into like, what is my unique way? And I mean, I don't focus on business, but it makes me think of this. I taught a course that was like rewiring your relationship with money through the body and the nervous system.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice.
And it was just like it was like only, it was I like doing small groups. So it was a small group, but all the stuff around business came through, of course, and money and all of everybody's ideas that they've internalized. And half of the time, like most of the time, these women were like, it was like just having permission, like that doesn't sound like you want to do it that way, or that you're not in alignment with that, you know? And then them getting to figure out through that process, like, okay, well, what is true and why have I swallowed? And this is what I think, this is the work you do. Why have I swallowed that this is the way I'm supposed to do business, you know? And how is it living in my body and my nervous system? I mean, that's the place we were going, right? Like, how is this way of operating kind of, I keep getting caught there, or I think I'm supposed to do that, and how do we unwind that so that there's more freedom to actually do what we truly want to do? So if
Totally.
anything, that was just my little plug for.
Yeah, well, I just want to say the permission piece is huge, because I wish someone could have given me permission early on. And now I find myself doing that for my clients all the time. I give you permission to not do it the way you've been taught and to figure out your way. And that's often where the trauma is. Where, let me just say, I'm not a trauma expert, but I have been trained in it. And I do a lot of that work with my clients. But let me be clear, I'm not an expert in that arena. I just do a lot of that with my clients. But that's where I see the trauma all the time, especially for the sensitive, healer, creative, right brain women, is there's a lot of trauma in the like, well, but I need to do it the way that I've been taught, because of course that's how we got love and that's how we got attention and that's how we got accolades or whatever else. And some women learned how to do that really well, but to the detriment of their own feminine soul. And so I just need to be like, give them permission to switch into their own way. But that in between place, ooh, mama, there's a lot of trauma there. And so I have to go very slow in that process often with them.
Mm, beautiful. Yeah. Um, so yeah, I mean, I'm curious how you see, like along these lines, I'm curious how you see kind of allowing, let's say, women, or help giving women this permission to find their own way. And also, I mean, you're calling your system, and I know you're looking at the feminine way. So
Mhm.
is there also a way that you have seen that you think women are more wired to, um, you know, I would say like I would say women are more wired, period. And then we could add like, are wired to how they kind of, I mean, every woman's different, but within that, I'm curious what you've seen in terms of like, um, yeah, that women have potentially a different way,
Yes.
overall. Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, so what I say currently of my body of work, and it's always evolving, is that I help women leaders unleash and reclaim their raw feminine power and then learn how to use it in the natural design of their feminine operating system. A little wordy because this is a very deep, broad body of work. I have a colleague that calls it a PhD in vagina. So that's like, I want to write the handbook of like how we women learn how to use our natural skill set, right? So there's a lot of how we're wired differently. And so, we could go into the very basic discussion of, there's an engine of the universe of polarity, like of yin and yang, of right brain and left brain, of lunar and solar, and of masculine and feminine. We're talking about like the archetypal energies, not gender, right? So there's a very particular flavor to the values of masculine archetype and feminine archetype. And so just the basics of, the masculine archetype is about direction and form and making things happen and being of service and structure and plans and strategies, right? And then the feminine archetype is more about a beingness rather than action, and it formless and sort of feeling and desire and pleasure and delighting in the human form. And so those are two very different flavors. Now, every human being has both of these archetypes inside them, right? So again, we're not talking about gender. So at the same time, let's say people in masculine bodies are going to generally have more of masculine values available to them. And same people in feminine bodies are going to generally have more of the feminine archetypal values available to them. So we live in a society based on masculine values, and not even the highest form of masculine values. Like patriarchy doesn't serve the men either. I'm very clear on that, but at least it's in their wheelhouse, right? But it's kind of like the lower forms of the masculine, like greed and aggression and, competition and, bottom line at all costs. So that doesn't serve anyone, but at least it's in their wheelhouse. So for us women, we've all been wired into that operating system based on masculine values, and it's not our natural design. So I try and explain that. I'm like, listen, that's like trying to run Windows on a Mac computer or putting diesel in a gasoline car. It doesn't work. And this is why so many of us as women are exhausted and have adrenal fatigue and on the verge of burnout, because we're running the wrong fuel, trying to like do it all, in a way that isn't ours. So, all that being said, if we bring these feminine archetypal values into the ways that we move in the world, and then especially, I am fascinated about how to do this in business, because I joke, I'm like, listen, I'm purpose obsessed. Like, I can feel when a woman's in her thing, like her soul alignment of what she came to do here on the planet. And I get so turned on by that. And when I feel a woman in her full power, I'm so turned on by that. And so, like, I will do whatever I can to help a woman get into her power and get into her purpose because I'm turned on. And then also, I know the world benefits. So, all that being said, how do women naturally do business differently? So there's lots of ways, and I'm still sort of like trying to find the pithy ways to explain this, but here are some possibilities of seeing it side by side. Generally business is meant to be like all about the hustle and grind and like make things happen, right? Well, that's masculine values. Feminine values would be like allowing something to happen and to flow.
Mhm.
Very different energies, right? But like nobody's taught us how to do that, and nobody thinks that there's even any value for that in business. but there is when it's your natural design, because now you're working with nature and how you do business, right? So that's one example. Another one is like starting with the plan and the strategy. Like, you want to birth something in your business, or what's your plan and your strategy and your 90-day like marketing, plan. Like everyone starts with like the form in business. Like that's how we're taught. That's not the natural design for women. We need to start with the desire and the turn on, and we need to allow something to ripen, and then the plan and the strategy come in for after that. That's a very different way of operating. And if we don't give ourselves time to be in our feminine design, then we're missing out on like form. It's interesting, like what I've really gotten, and it's a lot of this, no, I mean, I have amazing teachers who've taught me many things, but a lot of this is stuff that's just been like learned from within, that like power comes from the feminine. Like the power, the formless, raw power is feminine. And then you put structure around it and you give it form to make it happen. But if you start with the form first, you have no damn power. And that's why we're trying to muscle and grind and like, hustle and grind and muscle through to make something happen, because we've actually missed out on the raw power that's going to naturally make it happen. So this is where it's like women doing business from man mode is going against nature.
Mm-hmm.
So that's some examples. I'm looking at my notes to see what else I could say. Also, the to-do list is highest priority in business of like, everyone's all like, I got my to-do list and I'm going to check off my things. And they're like all into that. And, like, I've just got to get through and I got to eat that frog first, do the hardest thing first, like that's all very like masculine yang energy. But the feminine ideally follows turn on first.
Mm-hmm.
Turn on trumps the to-do list in our world. And it doesn't mean, and it's tricky because then it's like, well, wait, things aren't going to get done. Oh my God, I got to be responsible and be a good student and be a good girl and all these things. And it's like, no, you don't. You need to like tune in and listen to where the turn on is, and you follow that and you trust your flow that all of the things will get done that need to get done, but you need to let go of gripping to like your idea of what you think needs to get done. And within this, there's this whole process, if someone's spiritual path is important to them, I bring in a lot of like the divine too, of like, how do we allow the divine more into our business? So it's not all on our human shoulders, but we've got like the help of something so much bigger than us, where miracles can happen that we never could make happen, through our
Oh,
human form.
yeah.
So those are some examples.
Yeah, no, those are great examples. And I mean, I really resonate with that because I think I really learned a very male, I was like way conditioned by my dad, which is why I've been successful in the world in a lot of ways and in business. But what I notice is that exactly what you're saying. If it comes from, at this point in my life, if it comes from just like I can barely even do the to-do list if there's not like that raw power and that passion. If I don't have the turn on, then I'm just like, or I do it and then I just feel empty and I feel dead. And so it's like an exact feedback loop, right? And so exactly what you shared. I mean, I just personally resonate with that a lot, and that it makes, I know for me, I can do structure, but the structure just, it's true. Exactly what you said. The structure will just naturally, all the stuff that I know about structure will just like, oh, this just feels like the right structure now that I'm like super pumped about this thing that I'm doing, So I just really resonated with your explanation. And I also appreciated, I think that these terms are thrown around, this sort of masculine, feminine, I mean, in all different contexts. And so I really appreciated also what you said about, that the way you're working and you're so specific about it is that it's in business, but we as women have we're more aligned with those feminine qualities. And of course, if a woman would say, I feel more aligned to the masculine qualities, this is what actually works for me, then I'm sure you would go with that, right? It's just like each person gets to kind of decide that. But more of the norm is that women we're trained in this masculine oriented way of doing this, doing all of life. I mean, everything in life.
It's amazing what I've found that I can finally articulate. It's like most women don't need more business tactics.
Mm-hmm.
What they need is more power. Because what I found is, I have the skills. I've been a very highly paid like business coach. I can help you build your business, but I won't even do it these days. Instead, I help a woman connect to her own inner wisdom, generally through her body, even often through her genitals, or pussy is the word that I use in my world. Like, I connect a woman to pussy and we ask pussy questions. And she is the best business coach on the damn planet. Like, it's incredible. Like, pussy will come up with these ideas that I never could have come up with, and the woman couldn't have come up with. But like, to me, that's like I call her pussy the mouthpiece to God. So like, this is where it's one way where we can access the divine to listen to what's in alignment. So there's all these very different ways of operating, and so and along this fashion, what I found is if I help a woman break free from her conditioning so she can reclaim more of her raw feminine power to flow, she knows what she needs to do in business. I don't need to help her, coach her through it. It's amazing.
And
You
then
know,
she's on fire about it, I'm guessing.
yes,
Then it's, it's both, like you said, that the ideas come, but it's also that it's it's so interesting. I just want to make sort of a process comment of something that I'm appreciating about your work, and I've seen it before, but I'm noticing in this conversation. So, like, you seem to be really obviously embodying what you're teaching. Like, you come up with these phrases or these words or these ways of, right, these concepts, but they come from the raw. I can tell that they're coming from your raw feminine power, right? They're coming
yes,
from that experience of being in the feminine and being in operating in the feminine way. And then it actually is providing structure to it, because, and I've noticed this when I've, watched some either, yeah, just what you've posted or what I've watched of yours, that you often do then make it into like something that is very easily understood by the mind. Like, they're in concepts, which I would say is actually more of the masculine. So it's just, I'm really fascinated by words. And so I think when you keep, when I see like, it's like, you have your, I mean, you told me at another point, you have like your six with the dark feminine. What is it? Your six.
6 steps of dark feminine alchemy. Yes.
Yeah. So like, you've created that, but it's come from both your own personal experience of going into these waters yourself. And also it's come from the feminine. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just, and that to me, the fact that it's a list is the masculine. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Yes.
I'm
No,
just
it's great.
appreciating that. Yeah.
Can I share the piece? You and I had Voxer's voice memos back and forth as we were
Yeah.
feeling into what we wanted to talk about. But the piece about how I've seen that the feminine and masculine archetypes work together in business. Can I just
Yeah.
be
Please.
clear about that? Because I think feels like that might be interesting to add in. So nobody taught me this, but this was like I was listening. I'm like, so how do they like? I'm never saying that women should do business only from their feminine ever. Like the feminine operating system is a PhD in vagina, as my friend calls it. And so within that, there are these pillars where a woman needs to understand her dark feminine, because the dark feminine helps you understand your raw feminine power. So like that's an important pillar of the feminine operating system. You need to understand your body and your power. Your body is your partner in life. Your pussy, your sex power, like all of like pleasure, like that is part of your power as women. So like the second pillar is like the body temple and how to learn how to have your body as partner in life. And then the third pillar of the feminine operating system is divine union, like how you learn how to work with the masculine and feminine together so that their consummation is how you run your business. So this is why it's sort of a PhD. It's very deep body of work. Anyway, that's the backstory. So when I was listening to like, how do these two energies work together? Because one of the modalities I was trained in as a healer was called polarity therapy. And so I learned about positive pole, negative pole. And like, this is the engine of the universe. Like we live in a world of duality. So we need to understand how to work with this. And I totally geek out on this stuff. And I call it dark feminine physics and, love this concept. But anyway, all that to say, we need to learn how to work with the two together. This is how life gets created literally as a baby. And this is how things get created in our business. So this is what I heard of how they work together is ideally everything starts in the feminine, where you sit and listen into the great mystery. You're sitting in the unknown. Like if you think of the primordial substance of the universe before the Big Bang, before from which all things come, right? We've got to sit and be still and listen into the great mystery. And then when you do that, at some point, there is a pulse of yang, or a pulse of desire, or a spark of intuitive impulse of some kind. And then that desire, which comes from that deep space, is quite holy, in my opinion, and very in alignment. And then you want to feed that spark of desire. And as women, we can do that with our turn on and our pleasure and like our beingness. And so then we can gestate and ripen that spark, right? And so we spend some time being and gestating that spark. Well, then what happens is that desire now starts to, it was formless, right? Now it has the feeding of the desire. And so it has a little bit of not real form, but it's got like some pull to it, if you will, magnetism. And then what happens is that awakens the masculine archetype, because the masculine archetype is desperate to be of service. And so it wants to help the feminine get what she wants so much. So, but the masculine is awakened by the desire, that magnetic pull. So the masculine is like, my woman wants something. Okay, now I'm going to come up with a plan and a strategy to make it so. And then the structure and the form starts to come into this desire. And then now the two can turn into something in your business. And so that's what I've learned. And, you know, and so you can start to see where we're taught to do business in a completely ass backward way. We start with the form, with the plan and the strategy, but then there's no desire to like fill the sails of,
Yeah.
you know, that thing. And so
Yeah.
that's, you know, one of the pieces that's so different. And that means as women, we need more time in the great mystery. We need more time allowing the desire to gestate, and then the masculine form comes in effortlessly.
Mm. And it sounds like you really discovered, I mean, that was such an in-depth way of speaking to it. And I'm sure that that's also been like, uh, you know, I know that that's been replicated, even that, like in its own way, probably told a very similar story in certain spiritual traditions. And yet my sense is that even you telling it is like during these years, you actually discovered that in its own, like the way it moved through your own system, the way it's moved through your own body. Mm-hmm.
Well, I tell it in that way because I like to believe there's a transmission there. You know, like so much of, you know, my healer is still running the show with all of this, of like, you know, quite in a very shamanic way, if you will.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I will say I don't have it perfectly down of how to live that way in my business. I'm not going to say that.
Mm.
I'm still figuring out how to take that transmission and that beautiful
Mhm.
concept of teaching and put it into practice. This is, you know, that's the embodiment is a huge aspect of my work, you know, because I've been doing embodiment work for 20 years. So I'm not interested in just pretty concepts. I want to help bring it into the body. So
Yeah.
even, you know, when
Yeah.
I do my work with clients, like we're in the body, we're doing, you know, movement, we're doing play, we're doing like improv, you know, like there's a lot of aspects to it because we got to take it out of the head and down into the body, because especially as women, this is where our power lives, is in the body, right? So I'm still embodying that concept, but I get the transmission of it, and I'm still landing how to live that way all the time.
Beautiful. Yeah, I mean, I heard it as a transmission too, in the sense that I could feel it as you were speaking it. You know, feel the
Cool.
different, how that could. I don't have it down at all, so I haven't. um, and I do think it's probably a lifelong. I mean, this is more your body of work, but I know for me that I really am like I'm also on fire about it, at least for myself. Like, how do I actually, embody this in my own way? And it feels like it's a lifelong, like it does feel like, I mean, maybe not a lifelong project, lifelong sort of thing, but it's something that, you know, it's a dance. Like it's a constant kind of refining, we could say.
It's you're not wrong. I think it is lifelong, because the other way was hardwired into our neurons, right? So much of, you know, what I see, like I love that you use the term rewiring in your program, because I use that often. I'm like, listen, I got to help you rewire from your left brain to your right.
Yeah.
And because we're I mean, it's in our neurons, it's
Yeah.
biology, right? So that's
Uh,
why this work needs to be consistent and over time to literally begin to use new neurons. I don't know a lot about like, the brain stuff exactly, but I know that I need to help do that. So I often will talk about the feminine sometimes in a slightly masculine way because I'm like, I got to meet a woman where she's at in the left
yeah.
brain. And
Yeah.
then I want to walk her from that into the right brain. And so it's a process. And I know some women have said to me, like, you're being very masculine and talk about that. I'm like, I know it's deliberate. Like, I want to help the process to walk over. So I think it is lifelong because we're literally training our neurons.
Do you do that because it feels like then people will get it more in their system versus like, I know that some I mean, this is just a bigger question for me, like with healing work in general, because I think because I've done so much and I've studied so many different things, and I think sometimes the things that are all of the body, they don't use the mind enough, and so the thing sometimes we need the mind actually also needs to rewire. It doesn't only happen through the body. So
Yes.
I'm curious if that's one of the reasons that you would do that, is that you're kind of like you could do the purely somatic stuff and then it might rewire, but then the kind of like still the same sort of thought patterns aren't actually like, I mean, in some cases they do remain. Sometimes we do the body work and it clears it up, but I've seen both. I see like that is always um, I mean, in my experience with clients and in my own self, it feels like I've had to do it on both levels to get the rewiring. Like it's
Yeah,
not just in the body. Mhm.
right. And at the end of the day, again, we live in a world of duality. So I think we've always got to be addressing both. One of
Yeah.
the things I learned in polarity therapy is that, the way that you transcend duality is you need to put your attention on a positive pole and a negative pole at the same
Mhm.
time,
Mhm.
simultaneously. And then that brings you into the center to transcend. So I would never say it's all body. I would never say it's all feminine. It's
Yeah, yeah.
about the two together. And that's the consummation that like makes the whole universe go, right? So I think our left brain is very valuable and we don't want to throw that out. And I also think, especially if I'm working with women leaders who have learned how to create success already. And my audience is a very interesting blend of like, the healer priestess folks and like the successful, business owners. So, but if I'm especially if I'm talking to a successful business owner, I got to speak to her left brain first. There's no way like the ooey gooey like feminine shit is gonna work if I start there, right? So I try and weave in both.
That's beautiful. And it's great that you're able to work with such a varied audience, such a varied range of women for that reason, right? Because, and I love that you are so like passionate about, wanting this for all women, right? So that you want to be able, like what you said, it's like, rather than even doing it your way, you're actually trying to figure out like what's the way that people are going to actually understand this, Yeah. So
Because when I do like again, when a woman is in her full power,
I love
I
it.
it's amazing. I like the whole world benefits. Like we feed the world with our power and with our natural feminine, gifts when we learn how to be in them. And it's just, I mean, there's so many spells we need to break in the freaking world because we're taught that like our feminine is distraction or bad. All these things. It feeds the world when it's pure. It feeds the world. And so I just want more of it for myself and more of it for the
Yeah.
world.
Yeah. Well, we don't have that much more time, but I really want you to talk a little bit about the dark feminine, just because
Mm,
I am, we've been talking more about the divine union and also the feminine operating system. And I'm curious if maybe you want to say a little bit about kind of how you see the dark feminine fitting in here. I mean, obviously your story was that, your earlier story is that the dark feminine took hold, but yeah, I would love for people to hear that.
sure. So here's how I see it. It will come back to our world of duality. And you think of Chinese cosmology and the yin yang symbol, like the feminine is represented by the black side of the yin yang symbol. So the feminine is inherently dark. And yet we live in a world that thinks dark is bad and is afraid of the dark. But really, the dark, you could think of the moon or the womb or like the rich, fertile soil of compost. You know, these are all dark places, but they're so rich and rich with transformation generally, right? So, as a culture, just like we need to break the spell of patriarchal conditioning, we need to break the spell of like dark being scary and bad, because that's where our power lies as women. We are inherently dark, and that is not a bad thing. And so, you know, when we talk about, talked about the polarity and the positive and negative, like if you think of a battery, right? Like a battery has a positive pole and a negative pole and a neutral pole in the middle. And so the battery's power comes from the arc of electricity from positive to negative. So if you want to focus on your positive thoughts, as they are talk about, you know, in the law of attraction circles, you actually have no power. You want to be all positive and all light, you have no power. Power comes from the arc of electricity, positive and negative. So then that's another plug for the dark feminine of like, you want to be in your full power, you got to learn how to go into your negative pole, which we could call the darkness, we could call your shadow, which we could call your emotions, which we could call your body, which we could call your wild side, which we could call like the great mystery. This is where all of your power lies as women. So I really believe that the dark feminine helps us to de-armor our raw feminine power. And, you know, the dark feminine too, like she's all about death and rebirth as well. And so those are the laws of nature. Every living thing goes through birth, life, death, repeat. Birth, life, death, repeat. And as a culture, we like birth and we like life, but we don't like that death part of the cycle, and we avoid it at all costs. But nothing new gets reborn without going through death first. So I see it in business. Like, you want to create anything new in your business, you got to die to something fast. You know, like I say to my clients, like, you need to learn how to fall apart fast and die well. I don't care. You learned how to hold it all together to be a good girl and look like you have it all figured out. You need to fall apart fast and die well, because then you get to go back into the cycle to rebirth something, you know, to be reborn anew into the next thing that's coming for you. So you see that in my story. Like, I had to die like a mofo in order to be rebirthed into this new possibility. So I am very fascinated. So I've been leading a program on the dark feminine to take women into all of these places of the dark feminine, like emotion and sexuality and taboo and the shadow and death and rebirth and raw feminine power, because I want them to understand their power. And so that's a cornerstone to being in your feminine operating system, is learning how to work with the dark feminine instead of avoiding her, so that you can pick up all of your raw feminine power.
Well, and then you can also say, right, I mean, this maybe is inherent in what you said, that the dark feminine is, it's also, it's, I mean, you said it as it's the unknown. So it's like the places that we haven't looked at and that we've kind of, or that we're scared of, or like I was just thinking when you were talking, right, that it's like your story really shows that it's like, all I know is that this is not the way. There's another way. And in your mind, right? And then we go into, it's like your mind is saying, okay, I'm going to try this other way. And probably in 2 months, this is what's going to happen, and blah, blah, blah. Right. Like it has a whole story about what's going to happen. But then the truth of it is that you kept having to surrender into the unknown, into like, wow, I'm still not getting anything. Wow, I'm just sitting here. You know, I'm not, I mean, not just sitting here, but maybe that's what it felt like part of the time, right? And so it seems like also what you're saying is it's all of these things that you've named the dark feminine are, but it's about also being willing. I mean, being willing to die is being willing to let it all go and have no idea what is going to happen in that place. You know, it's like going into like the dark abyss, we could say, like, or the dark unknown, like, oh, I don't. And so, I mean, what I get curious about is like, when you're leading women through this process of really having, because I know that you're not just like introducing it, you're actually taking them there, right, through your program.
We do
But
a
it's
death
also,
ritual, yes.
but it's also like a very big, it's also a very long process. I mean, it's an unknown process for each woman. So I'm sort of curious, like how you work with that.
Can you ask the question a different way? What do you mean? How's it?
Well, it's
How
like, because
individual?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm guessing, right, that like I mean, this just kind of came to mind that it's a, I mean, when people are working with you one on one, it's obviously like this process that's happening, and it's like who knows, and but you're introducing these concepts, and I know you go deep in your work, so you're taking people into a deep process, and yet it might be an open process then, right? That like the person is still really with as they keep journeying through life, like everything that you're introducing. It may be that they die to something and they're in they're in the unknown for months because we don't know, because we can't control that. I guess I'm curious. Does that make sense?
I think so. Again, because I want to write this handbook of the feminine
Mhm.
operating system, I'm really fascinated. Like one of my clients says, she's like, you're teaching life skills. I'm like, I guess I am. It sounds
Mhm.
very grounded. So I even, when I teach these 6 steps of dark feminine alchemy in the program, like we finish up where I do the handbook of the dark feminine alchemy, where there's literally like prescriptions and formulas, which are so not feminine. I get that. But again, we need form and non-form, right? So they're all skills that, like, when something comes up for you in life, I've taught them all these things of how they can now be with it. And at the end of the day, because I was trained in this polarity therapy modality, I was trained in is energy work at its core. Basically, energy is either moving or it is not. When energy is moving, there's health. When energy is not moving, that's when disease can start to set in, and it builds up a static charge, and like energy can't move. The whole universe is either energy is moving or it's not. If a woman's in her power, her energy is flowing. If she's suppressed it, it's not, right? So like it's almost the simplest conversation. It's like hilarious. Of like, life is that simple. Something's either moving or it's not. Well, that's it. So I'm teaching all of these skill sets to help something to move.
Got
So
it. Okay.
so
Yeah,
I'm
that's
helping to
yes.
die as skill, and like they,
Yeah,
and I'll
yeah,
say to them, if something happens, if they, maybe we're on to another module, but something goes on in their life, I'm like, go do the death ritual again. You got some, like, you need to die to some more old ways, and
yeah.
then we'll see what's on the other side.
That's really cool. Thank you. You answered it. I mean, I was just curious kind of how you teach. To me, I think also because as my life has been like the dark from like I came into the world, the dark feminine. It's just like,
Right.
it's like I have no control over that. And yes, it would be. I had to learn a lot of these skills, but it's true, they are skills. So I like what you're saying because right, it's the way, and this goes back to your feminine operating system. It's the way that we were not taught, right? It was not, we weren't taught like how do you work with these energies essentially. That's what you're, and so that's great. So that really answered what I was asking, which is like it sounds like what you're really able to do with people is it's like you're taking people through a process to learn certain skills, and then of course they keep using them and refining them and finding their own way with them. But it's like you're giving them. I mean, it's a dark feminine school. It's like a dark like a
Yeah.
shamanic kind of school to learn these things. So yeah, that's really beautiful. I love that.
I've never done a mystery school, but been in one. But I'm assuming I'm sort of offering a
Yeah,
mystery
yeah,
school of
yeah.
some
It sounds
sort,
like it. Yeah,
is
yeah.
that they're skills, and even like we need, you asked me of like, how do you take something like the dark feminine and turn it into, a online program that's different than when you can lead someone through it one-on-one. And it's like, I didn't know. I had to sit down and like, okay, what would I really need someone to know? I'm like, well, they need to
Ah,
know about death. Okay. They also need to know about raw feminine power and how that works, about energy flowing or it doesn't. Like that's where I geek out my dark feminine physics. Okay. They also need to know how to be with their emotions because we've been taught to squash emotions. Well, we need to learn how to embrace them and allow them to move. Emotions are energy emotions, more like energy flowing, right? They also need to understand their shadow, like with all the stuff that's back there, like that's a lot of power there. Well, they also need to understand their sexuality and their taboo. There's a lot of power. So I was like, what are the basics? Like, this is a broad topic, but these are the pieces that a woman needs to understand to be with the dark feminine, in my opinion, and therefore her raw feminine power. And it's interesting if I can just share, like a woman shared in the Facebook group yesterday. She said, after watching, I made this video series about the dark feminine called Femflix, initiation, secrets of the dark feminine for women leaders. So she watched that series. She joined the program. She did the death ritual that we did in module 1 recently. And she's like, I just had the most successful month of revenue in 21 years of my practice,
wow.
and had a huge healing in my marriage that I never thought was possible.
Wow.
Birth module 1. I
Mm.
didn't do that. I just helped her die
Yeah,
and
that's
gave
amazing.
her, some things to do. So this is what I see. This is what I talk. I see the dark feminine as the future of leadership. Like that's why all women need to understand how to work with her, and like that kind of magic can happen. So this is why I'm so passionate about all of this.
Beautiful. I love that. Yeah. Well, and again, I think I'm really appreciating, like, I really appreciate the way that you are bringing, like, I mean, obviously the focus is on the feminine operating system and raw feminine power, but you're bringing in the masculine. And that's, I
Yeah.
think I haven't seen that as much, like the way that they can really dance together, and
Mm.
how I think, you know to some extent, right, like so much of what, when I think about what I'm doing with my clients, is I'm often teaching, let's say, like emotional regulation, or how do you be with your body, like what we're all doing, hopefully those of us who are more in the kind of healer, whatever, shamanic realm and business realm as well, is we're teaching skill sets, like it
Yeah.
is true, and then you keep using them and then they get easier. I mean, that's essentially what it is. And so there's something that just kind of turned on for me, because I often think of the dark feminine as like this kind of messy, like, it's like, oh, I'm just in this whatever kind of messy goop, versus like, oh, and of course I've learned skills that I've had to learn on my own, but I don't think about it that way. So something sort of just lit up for me about like, oh, you could, like, actually there's ways to be like, this is what it means to be a woman, and this is part of where, right, where our power lies. This is part of where we're going to feel juicier in life. This is part of
Mm.
where we're going to feel more fulfilled and be more on purpose and feel whatever, all the things that really light us up, or
Mm.
that make us. I often think about it actually as more than feeling meaningful and lit up. I think the more we are who we are, the more we just feel like, it's like there's something that happens when you are who you are, and
Yeah.
you're, in your conditioning. And we could call it power. We could call it, for me, it's just like I just feel like doesn't even matter what happens in life when I'm in that space. It's like I'm being me and I'm in integrity with me, and that's enough. So that's what it was,
Right.
that's sort of what it's.
I would call that alignment, because that
Mm,
I could geek out. I know we need to finish
yeah,
up, but I could geek out
yeah,
about the Shishumna. There's all these like
yeah,
energetic terms
yeah,
about being in our center core. So that's what I mean by alignment. So, it's all semantics, and we all have, whatever words work for
yeah,
them, but they're similar.
yeah. Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, I'm really appreciating that about your work. It's something that I've noticed kind of throughout my time of watching you too, where I've been like, oh, you're talking about these things that are very, that don't have form, but then you're putting form onto them. Like, it's so great.
It's
Uh,
kind of fun because even the way you talked about, like, you're not wrong. The dark feminine is total chaos and like in the goo for sure. But that's I would like, I say to my clients, I'm like, listen, I want you to go unhinged. I want you to fall apart and be a hot mess. And so like it can be sort of in a weird way in its unstructured chaos and goo, it can be a life skill.
yeah. Well,
I
no,
mean,
I think it is.
paradox, but
Yeah. Yeah, it is, because what I have found in all areas, right, is that the more we're with something, the more we know how to, the more we've, like for me, the more there's repetition. Same with my clients. I can have clients who have actually like been suicidal for years, and they actually learn how to deal with it really well,
beautiful.
because, right, it's something that it's kind of a skill set of like, okay, this comes up for me. How do I be with it? How do I, right? So it's the same thing. It's being able to like feel, like, yep, this sucks and it's not pleasant, and I know how to meet it. I mean, that's what I
It's
see it as.
beautiful.
Mhm.
And it's even, I could geek out for hours with you. Because,
I know.
I was
Well, maybe
trained.
we'll do a part two.
We might need to, because I was trained in cranial sacral therapy as well. And so there's a technique called the still point. And so I could talk about it a lot longer, but basically it's where you reach this point where it's total stillness. And we could call it that womb of the cosmic mother or the dark feminine, whatever. And what I've learned is like that's where reorganization happens. Like you don't change from one thing right into the next. If you think about when you're driving a stick shift car, you don't go right from first gear into second. You go from first gear into neutral and then into second. So this is where I take these like, very woo-woo topics and I'm, very scientifically, I'm a scientist of woology, I say, and like take them of okay, so you want to make some changes, you've got to go into that liminal in between space, so that's where, again, it's like, so you got to be a hot mess for a little bit if you want to make some change. You got to go into like the falling apart to, be reborn anew. So it's all of these concepts, but just learning how
Yeah.
to use them
Mhm.
as our power, as the ways we move through life and business.
Beautiful. That's a great ending um, to this conversation.
Yes,
Well,
part one.
thank you. Yeah, part one. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And yeah, this was really fun. Really.
Glorious. It was a blast. And thank you for creating this. I love that you wanted to learn more and sort of explore. My understanding was you wanted to explore more of your own feelings around the coaching industry and like go deeper with people around all of that, or just business or work or whatever. But just like, I love that you had a desire to connect with people and to learn more. And so 53 episodes, that's quite an accomplishment. So I want to celebrate you.
Yeah, I
And
think actually just to thank you. I think just to, I mean, I do have an investment in the coaching thing, but I think this show is really about the fact that I came on, and this relates to the dark feminine. I came onto the scene and I was like, why is everything about what you're going to get? Like
yeah,
every
yeah,
coach is marketing that. And I was like, because as a therapist and just as who I am as a human, that was not what that's not what you're speaking to. And so I was just really curious about what's the other way and can we speak about this in
yeah.
the coaching space? Yeah. So
Well, apologies didn't use the right words, but that's what I feel like. You had a desire to explore that, and so you
yeah.
created this, and now there's 53 episodes. So I just think that's so cool.
54. You're the 54th, which is
54,
amazing.
okay. So
Yeah.
I just appreciate you, and
Yeah. Thank
you.
you.
I can feel you bringing in a breath of fresh air to this industry with questions and being like, wait a minute, what about this piece? And so I'm just wanting to appreciate that I can feel your impact of what's happening in the field in this particular industry anyway. And so I just want to thank you for that.
Thank you. That means a lot. Yeah. Mm. Um, yeah, well, so I would love for people who don't know you to be able to follow you and know how to, learn more about your work.
Okay. I think the best invitation is I have a quiz on the dark feminine. So that's always a fun way to kind of get started to know her a little bit more and then get welcomed into the community if you'd like to join us. So there's a quiz called Which Dark Feminine Badass Are You in Business? And that's at darkfeminine.com. So you can take that quiz. There are 4 options. I'd love to hear what you find out for yourself. And then when you take the quiz, you'll get invited into my Facebook group called the Feminine Operating System Sisterhood. If you'd like to be a part of this storyline where we're learning, open sourcing how to do this all together. So please take the quiz, have fun with that. Even if you don't have your own business, you can see how you operate in your work. So darkfeminine.com, and then come join us in the sisterhood if you'd like.
Amazing. Yay. Okay. Well, thank you everyone. And thank you again for coming on the show.
Mm,
And
thank you for having me.
yeah, see everyone soon.
Bye. Thanks for joining us.